This video introduces you to the concept of multimedia learning. We'll start by defining multimedia learning, look at what learning is, and why multimedia learning can help support it. First, let's start with the fundamental question, what is multimedia? There may be different definitions out there, but for our purposes here, multimedia involves the presentation of content using a combination of words and pictures. Words can be printed words or spoken narration. Pictures can be illustrations, graphs, photos, maps, animation, video, and so on. This definition of multimedia encompasses anything from an annotated illustration, which contains static pictures and printed words, all the way to virtual reality, which has immersive video and spoken or printed text. Most of the multimedia you'll be designing will likely be products such as narrated slideshows or instructional videos. Before we start, let's talk about learning. What is learning?
According to Richard Mayer, the main scholar behind multimedia theory, there are two major goals of learning: remembering and understanding.
Remembering involves recall and recognition, such as when you're given a quiz after a reading to see how much you remembered. You may do well on the test, but that doesn't guarantee that you've learned. Understanding involves being able to construct a mental representation of the topic and being able to transfer what you've remembered to new problems or scenario not explicitly given in the original presentation. If you can only remember the material but are not able to accurately apply it in the right context, then you've engaged in rote learning, and what you've remembered is considered fragmented or inert knowledge. That type of learning might be useful in a trivia game, but not in any other practical situation. Meaningful learning is when you can recall what you've learned and accurately transfer it to another context. With that in mind, let's talk about the foundation of multimedia learning. The cognitive theory of multimedia learning builds on three assumptions. First, multimedia learning assumes that humans process visual information and auditory information through separate channels. Imagine yourself driving a car. You can pay attention to the road and you can listen to music at the same time, with relative ease because the view of the road comes through your visual channel and the music comes through the auditory channel. The second assumption is that humans can only process a limited amount of information in each channel at any given time. If you try to drive and text at the same time, you're overloading your visual channel and you won't be able to concentrate on the road. In a multimedia context, it means that we never fully process everything we see or hear when it is presented to us. Take a look at this illustration, for example. Afterwards, you may be able to recall parts of it, but not the entire illustration, especially if the illustration is full of complexity or if it's presenting a lot of new information to you. Likewise, when you are presented with spoken or printed text, you won't be able to recall everything word for word, but will typically pick up on keywords that help you build together a coherent message afterwards. Ideally, in a well-designed multimedia lesson, the visual and auditory information will be presented in a way that makes it easy for the learner to recall relevant information after the lesson is over. This leads us to the third assumption. Learning happens when we actively engage the material to construct meaningful mental representation. In other words, we focus on what we find to be relevant and we organize it into something that makes sense to us by fitting it into our prior knowledge. So, what happens when we are presented with multimedia? According to the cognitive theory of multimedia learning, there are three kinds of demands on our cognitive capacity. One type of demand are extraneous cognitive processes that do not support learning. These can be extraneous images or sounds that are added just for fun, perhaps to capture the learner's attention, but in fact end up distracting them from learning. Another type are essential cognitive processes that help learners mentally represent the instructional material in their working memories. While essential cognitive processes are obviously important, if that's all that happens, then the learner might be doing rote learning, which, as we said before, is when you can recall a lesson but not apply it to the right context. The final demand on cognitive processing is generative cognitive processing, which involves integrating the material with relevant prior knowledge. The goal of multimedia learning, therefore, is to reduce extraneous processing, balance essential processing, and foster generative processing. Each principle of multimedia theory addresses one of these goals, and we'll discuss each of these in more detail in the other videos.